Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Even if it's a little bit chilly, I can't believe how the weather has changed dramatically in the last few weeks. But I hope you're all well and looking forward to the weekend ahead. So today's topic might be a bit scary for some, but I think it's a topic that most people should actually listen to, just purely because even if you don't have high cholesterol now, there's always a risk as one ages, unfortunately, that you could develop high cholesterol. So there's certain measures that you can put in place to try and minimize that risk. So I've prepared some slides for us. I'll go through the whole presentation first, and then please let me know that you're here and post any questions you've got, and we'll address all those questions at the end. Hello, Cheryl. So glad you're here. All right, so let's get going with the slides. Right, so I hope you like my picture, and I think a lot of you can possibly relate to that. Like you think cholesterol and think, oh, I can't eat any nice food anymore. So I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll realize that you still can. Okay, so what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is a type of lipid, fancy word for fat. And most of the cholesterol in our bloodstreams is made in the liver, and we actually need cholesterol. That's the good news. We get a little bit of cholesterol from dietary sources. And then in the olden days, even when I studied first, we were told that dietary sources of cholesterol like liver and eggs need to really be minimized, that you need to say that they're kind of like got an evil label if somebody's got cholesterol. And more now, they realize that it's actually not that bad to have some of those foods. It doesn't impact your cholesterol levels as much as we thought in the past. So that's the one bit of good news. Now, why do we need cholesterol? So it's not all bad, not all evil. We need it for healthy cell membranes. We need it for certain hormones. And more importantly, even, or possibly equally important, is it's a component of vitamin D as well. It's required for vitamin D synthesis. So as you can see, it is a necessary element, but the problem comes in when the levels go a little bit too high. And I wanted to just introduce the word lipoprotein, because for anybody who's had their cholesterol levels tested, I'm sure you'll recognize that word. And it's basically a transporter of cholesterol. And you get two types that most people are aware of, the LDL, low-density lipoprotein, and then the HDL, high-density lipoprotein. And to make things sort of simplify things, HDL is always labeled the good guy, and LDL, the not-so-good guy. And I'll go into a bit more detail. So there's a bit of a picture, just to sort of, in a nutshell, give you an idea of how the two work. As I said, the low density the LDL stands for low density, and the HDL for high density lipoprotein. Now the LDL carries cholesterol to the artery. So as you can see there in the wheelbarrow, nice analogy, it deposits the cholesterol in the artery. The HDL works quite hard at removing that cholesterol from the arteries. Now the problem is when you get too much LDL, too much cholesterol deposited within the arteries, it can cause something called a plaque, which is basically a blockage. What can also happen then, and obviously that blocks the blood supply, which can cause problems, heart attacks, increase your risk of heart attacks. Also, what could happen is that a little bit of that plaque can come off, can float to places where we don't want clots, and it can cause other issues there. So just in keeping it very, very simple, LDL is the one, sort of that lipoprotein is the one that brings cholesterol deposits in the arteries, and the HDL is the guy that takes it away. So what does that mean? We want to keep LDL levels as low as possible, and we really want to promote good HDL levels. Okay. So what are some of the risk factors for raised cholesterol? Now, a lot of people have very high cholesterol levels, and invariably that's a genetic problem, and a lot of those people would be put onto medication. It's not to say that they can just have their medication and sit back and relax. You obviously always want to go on the lower dose of medication as possible, because every medication has side effects. So in those situations, you need to work on a combination of lifestyle changes, nutrition, exercise, as well as medication. Then just simply poor diets. And I refer back to the olden days, which is my days actually, but where if you thought of sort of the Sunday lunch and everything that went into Sunday lunch, unfortunately meals were not necessarily that high in fiber as well, and I'll speak more about that later. But the types of fats, it wasn't always so important in terms of the types of fat that you include into your meal. Being overweight is definitely a risk factor for high cholesterol levels. Smoking as well. Smoking, they've shown, can reduce your HDL cholesterol levels, which is the good guy, the guy that shifts cholesterol from the arteries away. Age, unfortunately, is another one, and that's linked to menopause as well. Typically, most females, they might be absolutely fine leading up to menopause, never had a problem with cholesterol levels, and suddenly now their cholesterol levels get a lot higher. So what I would urge everyone to do is, if you're in that perimenopausal phase, or you're approaching, or you're in menopause, have a test done, have that fasting lipogram test, and just check your levels. Even if you were absolutely fine in the past, it's just a good test to have as you enter into menopause. All right, and then a sedentary lifestyle, also very, very, very big risk factor for high cholesterol. And we'll cover this again a bit later, but being active actually increases your HDL, the good guy, which mops up the cholesterol from the arteries. So you want to be as active as possible. Diabetes is also another risk factor for high cholesterol levels. Okay, so now how do you test your cholesterol levels? I mentioned that big word, the fasting lipogram, before. So that's kind of like the king or queen of testing cholesterol. Invariably, a lot of you would have experienced the Fingerprint screening test, especially if you do your vitality health check. And that is just that. It is a screening test. So it will come back and it will give you your total cholesterol value. And it will indicate whether or not it's necessary for you to go and have the more in-depth fasting lipogram. So what fasting lipogram is literally you do just that. So you fast the night before, you try and get to the lab as soon as possible, as early as possible in the morning if you're me, otherwise you're very grumpy, having not eaten anything, not had any breakfast before you go. But what's important there is that you fast. It's really, really important. And that test will look at your levels, the different levels. It will look at the LDL, it will look at the HDL, and it will look at something called triglycerides, which is fat basically as well, floating in your bloodstream. Now, too high triglyceride levels can be a problem all on their own, can increase risk of having pancreas problems as well, but I'm not going to delve into that today too much. But what I do want to say is, and I put the reference values there on the right of the slide, what is almost the most important is that ratio at the bottom there, the total cholesterol to HDL. That will signify your overall risk of developing heart disease. Now, as you possibly know already, there are so many different risk factors for developing heart disease. One of them is raised cholesterol. Another one would be blood pressure. Another one would be obesity, being overweight. And cholesterol is just one of them. So depending on how many other risk factors you might have, your recommended ratio of that total cholesterol, the recommended value of that total cholesterol to HDL might be different. If you're somebody who has a lot of other risk factors, you're going to want to try and get your level as close to that 3.5 as possible, or your ratio. If you have no other risk factors, very active, good body composition, then 5 is possibly fine for you. Okay, so that's important to remember, and it's important to interpret the results correctly as well. If your LDL is slightly raised, but your HDL is through the roof, you're in a good way, because now even though you're getting a lot deposited, there's a lot being removed as well. Okay. So the question we're possibly all asking ourselves is, how can you actually reduce your triglycerides? How can you reduce your LDL, and how can you increase your HDL levels? So I'll start with the triglycerides, which are the blood fats as well. So all the research shows if you lose weight, you can actually impact all those levels. So if you're at your ideal body weight, you're already on a front foot in terms of managing overall cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Also, another factor is to reduce the refined carbs and the added sugar. Now, too much sugar, too many refined carbs can increase your LDL, but they also increase inflammation around the body. And that alone is a risk factor as well for heart disease. It's a risk factor for sort of that plaque breaking off a little bit, forming a clot. If your arteries aren't in a good way, if they're very inflamed, then you're increasing your overall risk factor of the heart disease there. Another one is reducing alcohol. So if you're somebody who drinks heavily sort of throughout the week, that I would consider cutting down quite a bit. Maybe you only have half a glass, in which case it's okay, but moderate amounts of alcohol. Too much alcohol can definitely increase your triglycerides. So just be mindful of that. Another one is to increase your omega-3 rich foods. And it's a huge positive when it comes to omega-3, it's a huge benefit. And that's, when you think omega-3, you must think oily fish, can be your fresh tuna, your salmon, your mackerel. Walnuts is a brilliant source as well, and flax seeds. So for people who don't eat fish, walnuts and flax seeds are a really good form of plant-based omega-3 foods. And then also increase what we term there monounsaturated fatty acids. And that you will find in the likes of avo, olive oil, some in canola oil as well, and then your nuts, certain nuts having more than others. So as you can see here, it's almost tending towards a bit of a Mediterranean type diet, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. Right, so how can we reduce the LDL, the not so great cholesterol? Again, you'll see there's a bit of a pattern developing here, but lose weight. If you need to lose weight, you want to be at your optimal weight. When I say weight, I mean body composition. I as a dietitian, hate the word weight. It doesn't really mean too much. You want to be at your optimal body composition in terms of a nice, healthy body fat percentage and not necessarily weight. All right. As in, sorry, I hope that made sense. You want to be at a good weight, but that equates to a healthy body composition. Secondly, you want to increase soluble fiber. Now, the best sources of soluble fiber are going to come from plants like vegetables and fruits, and that's where we want to have minimum 5 a day, a combination of your vegetables and fruits. Then legumes, also a fantastic one. So legumes would be your chickpeas, your lentils, your beans, and oats for breakfast. I always said it's the queen or king of breakfasts, and for that very reason, it is so rich in soluble fiber. Another food that's really great and that I typically sort of mention to my clients who have got high cholesterol levels is Oat Bran. Now, Oat Bran is concentrated soluble fiber. You can eat it as a porridge, or you can add it to smoothies, you can add it to soup, and it just gives this nice concentrated form of soluble fiber. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail as to how this works. So what happens is when you eat a meal, your body secretes bile salts. Okay, now those bile salts have existing cholesterol that's picked up. It uses cholesterol in those bile salts, so it's removing existing circulating cholesterol. What happens is now the soluble fiber in your meal will grab onto that cholesterol and will excrete it instead of it being able to be reabsorbed again. So the more soluble fiber you have, the more you're going to excrete actually existing cholesterol. Never mind the cholesterol that maybe you've eaten with the meal, you'll get rid of that as well, but you're also getting rid of existing circulating cholesterol. So yeah, the best way, if you had to ask me for one tip, or if I wanted you to take away one tip from today, it's to increase your intake of soluble fiber. All right, the next tip there would be to reduce your intake of saturated and trans fats. So saturated fats are your animal fats. So it's the skin on chicken, it's very fatty red meat. It's going to be, you also find some saturated fat in the likes of coconut and coconut oil, but that type of saturated fat is not as sort of damaging as some of the other more animal-based fats. And you'll also find it in your full cream dairy products. So ideally, what you want to do is you want to reduce the full cream to sort of low-fat, fat-free, but be careful that you're not replacing that fat with lots of sugar. So in an ideal world, if you were thinking yogurt, it would be a fat-free plain yogurt, not a flavored yogurt. And the reason there is that when it comes to sort of pros and cons, I would put saturated fat and refined carbs on the same scale in terms of health. So there's no point in reducing saturated fat, but replacing it with your refined carbs and sugar. You actually, there's no difference. You're going to stay exactly where you are in terms of your health and your cholesterol levels. Okay, the other one there is trans fats. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Trans fats is the one that you'll find in your deep fried products, your pastries, baked goodies that you maybe buy from the shop. A lot of the time, oil that's been reused over and over and over again will contain trans fats. So the message there is, if you are going to buy takeaways, if you're going to eat out, really be comfortable that the place you're going to is good, is reputable, and you're confident that they haven't been using that same oil, over and over again for days or weeks. All right, moving on to the next point there. So increase your, again, that funny word, the monounsaturated fatty acids and the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And like we mentioned before, that's avo, olive oil, fatty fish, nuts, seeds, also canola oil. All of those are good guys, and they really are the healthy fat that actively reduce your LDL levels, reduce your triglyceride levels as well. A lot of the time as well, when you automatically, because you're including more of those monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids, you're automatically replacing a lot of the saturated fatty acids as well. So it's almost a bit of a double whammy there. You're getting the benefits of reducing saturated fat and increasing all those healthy fats as well. Next tip is to limit all dietary sources of cholesterol. Now, the impact is not great. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I would never limit all dietary sources. It is a recommendation, but it's very old-fashioned. So things like your liver, your shellfish, your eggs. I mean, now the recommendation is, and I remember, well, it was quite long ago, but we were trained to say no more than 3 or 4 eggs per week if somebody's got high cholesterol. Now the recommendation is no more than 7 a week. So things are a lot more relaxed, and if you can sort of reduce cholesterol levels using the other tips above, I think you're good to go. You don't need to I wouldn't have liver every day, and I wouldn't have 4 eggs every day. Then you're just sort of pushing things a little bit, but just be mindful of it, and just watch your intake. Wouldn't go over 7 eggs per week if you are somebody who has high cholesterol. The other point or tip there are to increase your intake of plant sterols or stanols, and Fluoroproactive is a product that's been around for ages. That's a margarine that you could use instead of butter or your other margarine, and it's actually those plant sterols actively reduce your cholesterol levels as well via the gut. So that's another option to consider. All right, so moving on, what can you do to increase your HDL? Again, I'm sure you must be picking up the pattern by now. So lose weight if you need to, achieve an ideal body composition. Reduce the refined carbs and the added sugar. Increase the monounsaturated fatty acids and the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And one that comes here as well is limit alcohol. Okay, moderate amounts of alcohol. And then the one that actually plays a huge role is to be active. Being active, at least 30 minutes moderate activity, 5 days a week. There are different amounts if you want to do high intensity exercise, but on average, 30 minutes moderate 5 times a week will benefit you hugely in terms of increasing your HDL. And just a reminder that we mentioned before, that HDL is responsible for clearing those arteries. It's for clearing and picking up the cholesterol that was deposited by the LDL. All right. So, or the LDL, the lipoprotein that carries the cholesterol. So now, just quickly covering some of the medications, and I put statins at the top of the slide purely because it's the most commonly prescribed medication for high cholesterol levels. All of these that I mentioned here are going to have side effects. Most medications, if they work, they're going to have side effects. I know a lot of people who do experience side effects from statins, but you've got to, at the end of the day, weigh the pros with the cons. If you're somebody who's got genetically high cholesterol, and purely by sort of changing your lifestyle, exercising more, you cannot get those levels down to a level that's acceptable and that reduces your risk of heart disease, then in my mind, it's almost a no-brainer to include the statin at the lowest possible dose, and then at the same time, make sure that you're ticking the box when it comes to the lifestyle changes you need to make. There are others here. I'm not going to go into too much detail with regards to all the medications. Niacin is another one that actually helps raise the HDL cholesterol so that you can clear those arteries. But yeah, I just put it on the slide just as a reference. So I'm hoping that we can have a few questions that we can spend sort of 10 minutes or so answering them. But in a nutshell, we need to achieve an ideal body composition. I think that message came through quite clearly. We need to increase your intake of soluble fiber. Huge, huge benefits there, massive. You want to limit refined carbs and added sugar. You want to limit saturated fat and trans fats and replace those fats. It's not to say you don't want to have fat in your diet. You need some fat. You just want to replace those fats with the healthier polyunsaturated fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids. And there you need to think olive oil, canola oil, nuts, seeds, avo, and the likes. Moderate alcohol consumption and be active. For me, that's almost like an easy way, relatively easy way to change your profile and to reduce your risk. Being active, increasing the HDL, which will then mop up the not so healthy cholesterol from the arteries. All right. So I felt like I rushed to that a little bit, but hopefully you got all of that. But I'd like to come back and see what questions we have, and hopefully we can get through all of them. All right. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you. Okay, so Sharon comes down. Okay, so yes, absolutely. And the message there, Sharon's mentioning that she's on statins, she's got a family link, there's a genetic link there, and she definitely wants to come off the statins. I'm sure there are some side effects there. So what I would do, if you're not optimizing your diet, I think exercise-wise you're doing pretty well, but if you're not where you could be, if it's not ideal and optimal, then work on that and check your cholesterol levels, check your ratio every 6 months. I'm sure your doctor gets you to do that anyway, and see, and then you can adjust and see what is the lowest dose that you can successfully manage your cholesterol using lifestyle and medication. But absolutely, I think the low dose possible is definitely the first prize. All right, let's go through and see what other questions there are. Yes, so Sharon, absolutely. I mean, that is in my mind, it's such an easy change and an easy way to keep those cholesterol levels down or to get rid of circulating cholesterol is by increasing your soluble fiber. Right, is fat-free better than low-fat? Okay, so I'm answering all your questions, Sharon. So there again, no, not necessarily. If you're talking about a fat-free yogurt that's sweetened with loads of sugar versus a low-fat or full cream yogurt, I'm actually going to go for the full cream or low fat. So when I say fat free, I'm not saying that it must be flavored yogurt, for example. In fact, I go in the middle. I go with the low fat. So you're getting the sugar, but you're not getting as much saturated fat. So the message there is, first prize would be fat free plain yogurt. Yeah, I would definitely go for the plain yogurt if you want to reap the benefits of reducing saturated fat and not having a lot of added sugar. All right, I hope that answered your questions. Okay, so then also it does feel like it's a one-on-one consult here, Sharon, but I'm sure we'll get round to some other Jeffers as well and answer some questions. So how much plant protein, legumes in a particular week? So generally what I recommend, if you're not somebody who's vegetarian or eats lots of legumes, I would recommend that you start off with two vegetarian type meals, meatless meals a week. And they include loads of those legumes. If it's soup, if you're having a vegetable and legume soup, add that extra oat bran to the mix as well, because then you're just having a pot of goodness, a pot full of soluble fiber that's going to do wonders for your existing circulating cholesterol as well. So yeah, if you're not somebody who's typically eats a lot of legumes, I would try in the beginning, I would try and have twice a week, and optimally then go for sort of 3 to 4 times a week ultimately. But that said, I also want to mention that people who experience digestive issues, maybe IBS, don't suddenly increase your load of fiber. So the fiber's got benefits, but as I'm sure a lot of you might know, if you go overboard with the fiber too quickly, you're going to experience some rather nasty side effects digestive system-wise. So you need to pace yourself. And also, as soon as you increase your fiber, you need to match that increase with an increase in water as well. Otherwise, what happens is you end up getting constipated as opposed to having a nice, healthy digestive system because there's just too much fiber. So just bear that in mind, is that if you're not used to having a lot of fiber, whether it's soluble or any other type of fiber, increase gradually. We don't want flare-ups of IBS or anything like that. And make sure you match with water. Ah, yes, so those bran, banana and bean muffins is one of my favorites. I originally put together that recipe for my kids. Never told them there were beans in them. One day they got big and they saw me adding the beans, and I was like, they're definitely cocoa beans, chocolate beans, but now they know. They're old enough to know now. But yeah, absolutely brilliant way. If you're somebody who doesn't like the taste of beans or the look of beans or the thought of beans, disguise them. Absolutely the best way to do it. So there you're adding sort of nice, getting a bit of soluble fiber in those muffins from added oat bran, plus a banana, plus the beans. So it's you could almost call it a reducing cholesterol muffin, but we won't. I'm sure there's a more catchy name. Okay, let's go here. Your family one option already eating correctly, not a big alcohol drinker. Okay, so there again, I'm not sure, sorry, it just says Facebook user, but another genetic high cholesterol. You were on statins, then, okay, so you wanted to extend the family, so you came off the statins. So there you've just really got to optimize. And I know you say that you're really eating correctly, not a big alcohol drinker. My advice there is you could look at some of the other medications. It's not something I can go into detail, but your doctor should be able to prescribe something alternative with minimal side effects there. But also you just really need to push that fiber, push that soluble fiber. You might be eating well, but maybe you could actually still improve in certain areas by pushing that soluble fiber and really increasing that almost with every meal. Just sort of during the pregnancy. Another thing with pregnancy though is that your cholesterol levels can increase during pregnancy as well. So it's a bit of a double whammy. But my message there, yeah, it's sort of test beforehand, test afterwards, and chat to your doctor about alternative medication during pregnancy if need be. I'm not sure what your levels are, but that's a discussion you'd have to have with your doctor. All right. So for heartburn is about, yeah, Vanessa, absolutely. I mean, there are lots of side effects to statins. You've got to always do that weighing up the pros and cons. At the end of the day, if you can reduce your risk of heart disease, and there's a strong family history of heart disease, I would err towards the statins and then try and manage the heartburn. I mean, there are many things that you can do to manage heartburn, but that's a talk all on its own. But we could chat directly about that after this talk. Okay, how do we work out best body composition for our age and height? So that's also a talk all on its own. And that's something, Sharon, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards as well. We can chat directly. Obviously, as you get older, sort of muscle mass becomes a bit less. Body fat, it depends on genetics as well, but it depends on how active you are. So that I mean, maybe we should do a jet ed on that all alone as well. Okay. Let me see. So have we... Okay, so sorry, I don't know your name, Facebook user, but you're mentioning here as well sort of that those tests do not give a breakdown between the good and the bad cholesterol. Okay, so Vitality, I think they're doing a great thing, to be honest, in doing the screening. So it's a first stop. If you're somebody who knows that you've got a history of high cholesterol, then the screening test is, yes, probably a bit pointless. You go straight for the fasting lipogram. But for people who've never tested their cholesterol levels, having that screening test is actually a really good idea, and it's the first step. And a lot of the time, they will find people who thought they were absolutely fine, and maybe they're quite young, they didn't know, or didn't think about they could perhaps have high cholesterol, or didn't know about a family history. And that's a first step in getting the doctor to investigate further and to discover. And maybe you're told that you've got high cholesterol from the screening test, and you go and have the lipogram, and you know what, don't worry, your HDL levels are through the roof. So there's no real risk. So I think the screening is sort of, it's not the be all and end all, but it's just a good start point if you've never tested before. And then if there's any indication that your levels might be high, then you're going to have the fasting lipogram. Also, in terms of your triglyceride levels, you can only get a real true reflection of whether they're high or not if you have fasted. If you haven't fasted, you could just have had a fatty meal recently, and you're going to have circulating levels of those triglycerides anyway. So to get a really accurate reflection of triglycerides, which is part of your fasting lipogram test, you need to do that properly. You're not going to get an accurate finger prick indication of triglycerides. Okay. So eat lots of veggies, legumes, fish, dairy. Absolutely, in a nutshell, that's absolutely perfect. So yes, you need to think more plant-based. I mean, there's a whole lot of advantages there, but more plant-based, because naturally by including more plant-based foods and protein foods, you are going to increase your intake of that soluble fiber. If you've got digestive issues, I want you to do it gradually. You need to pace yourself. Some of the time, quite a few of my clients as well have asked, is it worthwhile going completely vegan, completely vegetarian? And my first question is always, do you have digestive problems? Do you suffer from IBS? If you do, then no. The answer is simple, because you are going to set yourself up for failure. Too much fiber in somebody who's already sort of quite inflamed and very prone to having problems with constipation or loose stools or just painful cramps, anything like that. And invariably, if somebody does change to vegetarian or vegan, they do it overnight. So suddenly now they're vegan or vegetarian, and that's never a good idea. So if you're not sure and you want to try it out, absolutely fine. But I would speak to somebody, sort of somebody who specializes in nutrition, just to get their advice. And maybe you're not a good candidate for eating that way, but you can still very much benefit from 2, 3, or 4 meals a week where you're including more plant-based protein. Okay. Let's see, I think we're running out of time a little bit. Sorry, I'm just, Sharon, having a look at your question. You were 10 grams of my diet has been deal breaker. Okay, so yes, I think we can definitely chat to each other, and if anybody wants to set up a chat time with me, I'm very happy to chat to you and give you a few tips about anything that we chatted about today. So just reach out to me. You can direct message me. You can continue putting some comments on here as well. I think we need to wrap up now, but I'll go back and try and answer them the best I can. But I hope you at least got a little bit from today's talk. Just think soluble fiber and keep active. We want to increase the HDL by keeping active. We want to reduce levels of existing circulating LDL by including lots and lots of soluble fiber in our diet and moderating the amount of saturated fat, rather replacing that saturated fat with healthier forms, the polyunsaturated, the monounsaturated, and there we're thinking the olive oils, the avo, the nuts and the seeds and the fatty fish. All right, lovely chatting to all of you. Time always flies incredibly fast. I'm not sure why, but if we need to do a follow-up on this chat, we can definitely schedule something. And like I said, if you've got any questions, just reach out to me and I'm very happy to help. All right, have a super weekend. Cheers for now.